Deportation was only the beginning of Martin's hell. After 15 years working in California, 7 armed men were waiting for him in his village in Michoacan. They took everything: his savings, his dignity, and almost his life. The only thing they couldn't take away was his will to survive and the love for his family, which drove him to face the greatest danger of all: returning. Dust rose in small clouds beneath Martin's worn boots as he walked through the streets of Santa Maria del Oro, a forgotten village in the mountains of Michoacan. It had been so long since he last set foot on this land that he almost felt like a foreigner. 15 years away had erased some memories, but others remained intact like old photographs kept in a box. The smell of burning firewood, the laughter of children playing in the square, the sound of church bells at dusk. Everything seemed the same and at the same time completely different. "Isn't that Martin, Doña Lupita's son?" he heard someone ask as he passed the grocery store. Martin just raised his hand in a quick greeting without stopping. He didn't want to talk to anyone yet. He didn't know what to say. How could he explain that after 15 years of sending money, building a house for his family, and dreaming of a triumphant return, he now came back deported with an old backpack as his only possession? The words got stuck in his throat like stones. His wife Carmela and their 2 children were waiting for him in that house he had never lived in. He had built it brick by brick with the money he sent each month, following the plans they drew together on video calls. 2 floors, 4 bedrooms, a large patio for the children to play. It was his pride, the tangible proof that those years of sacrifice had been worth it. But now, as he approached it, he felt a weight in his stomach that wouldn't let him breathe. "Dad!" shouted Daniel, his 12-year-old son, running toward him as soon as he saw him appear at the corner. Martin dropped his backpack and hugged him tightly, lifting him off the ground as when he was little, though he weighed much more now. "You're here, you're really here," the boy repeated between laughs. Behind him came Carmela and Laura, his 16-year-old daughter. Laura walked slowly, as if she didn't know how to react to this man who was more a photograph on the shelf than a real father. "Welcome home," said Carmela with eyes shining from held-back tears. She hugged him tight, and Martin buried his face in her neck, breathing in that scent he had dreamed of so many times during the lonely nights in his Los Angeles apartment. At that moment, for a brief instant, all the fear and shame vanished. He was home, with his family. The rest could wait. But reality didn't wait long. That same night, while they ate beans with handmade tortillas by Carmela, Martin told them what had happened. How he was stopped for a broken taillight on his truck. How they discovered his work permit was fake. How they kept him for 3 days in a detention center before putting him on a plane to Mexico City without even allowing him to collect his things or say goodbye to anyone. "But we have the house. We have the savings," said Carmela, squeezing his hand across the table. "We can start over here." Martin nodded, not daring to tell her that the savings weren't as much as she believed. That a large part of the money had gone to lawyers who promised to help him and disappeared with the dollars in their pockets. That the future he had imagined for them now looked blurry, uncertain. That night, lying in a bed that felt strange, despite having bought it himself, Martin couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling while Carmela breathed peacefully beside him. What was he going to do now? What was he going to work as in a village where the only industry was farming and a few small businesses? His hands were used to construction, to carrying heavy materials under the California sun. 15 years of experience that here were worth nothing. The following days were a mixture of joy and tension. It was wonderful to really get to know his children, to discover what kind of people they had become while he only watched them grow through a screen. Daniel was curious and restless, always asking questions, always wanting to know more about the United States, about the jobs his father had had, about what life was like there. Laura, on the other hand, was more reserved. She observed him with a mixture of curiosity and resentment, as if evaluating whether this man deserved to call himself her father after being absent for so long. "Why don't you come to my soccer game tomorrow?" Daniel asked him one afternoon, while Martin was trying to fix a leak in the roof. "I'm the best forward on the team. The coach says I could play in the major leagues someday." "Of course I'll go," replied Martin, feeling a pang of pain as he realized how many games he had missed, how many important moments in his son's life had passed without him being present. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." But the world had other plans. That same night, while the whole family was sleeping, a sharp noise woke him up. Someone was knocking on the door forcefully. Martin jumped up, his heart beating so hard he could feel it in his ears. Carmela turned on the night lamp, frightened. "Who is it?" asked Martin, approaching the window cautiously. "Police," replied a voice on the other side. "Open the door." Martin exchanged a look with Carmela. Something wasn't right. The police didn't come like that in the middle of the night, knocking as if they wanted to break down the door. But before he could say anything else, the door gave way with a creak, and 7 armed men entered the house. They weren't police. They wore masks and long weapons that pointed directly at him. "Martin Suarez?" asked one, the one who seemed to be the leader. "Welcome to Mexico, man. We have a lot to talk about." The next few minutes were chaos of shouting and rough movements. The men forced them all to sit in the living room while they ransacked the house looking for something. Martin tried to stay calm, although inside he felt like he was crumbling. He saw the terror in his children's eyes, Carmela's silent tears, and he knew this was his fault. Somehow this was related to him, to his return. "Listen carefully," said the leader, coming so close that Martin could smell the tequila on his breath. "We know everything about you. We know you've been sending money for years. We know about the house, about the land, about everything, and now you're going to give us what's ours." "I don't understand," replied Martin, genuinely confused. "I have nothing. I just came back deported. Everything I had is in Los Angeles." The blow came without warning, straight to his stomach, leaving him breathless. "Don't play dumb," growled the man. "The fee. Everyone here pays a fee. Your family has been paying for protection since you left. But now that you're back, the price has gone up. And you owe us for all these years. You've been sending money without giving us our share." Martin looked at Carmela, seeking an explanation. She had her eyes fixed on the floor, unable to meet his gaze. She had never told him anything about a fee, about payments for protection, in their calls, in their messages. She had never mentioned that part of the money he sent ended up in the hands of criminals. "I don't have that money," said Martin, trying to keep his voice from shaking. "I used all my savings on this house, on supporting my family. I have nothing left." The leader let out a dry laugh, humorless. "Then we have a problem, don't we? Because you see, things work in a very simple way here. Either you pay or you leave. And if you can't leave and you can't pay, well, there are other ways to settle the debt." He headed toward Laura, who was trembling in a corner of the sofa. He ran a finger across her cheek in a gesture that made Martin feel nauseous. "Your daughter is already grown up, very pretty. She could work for us in various ways." Martin threw himself at him without thinking, blinded by rage and fear. He didn't get very far. 2 of the men held him while the leader hit him again and again, in the face, in the stomach, in the ribs. When he finished, Martin could barely stand. Blood ran down his chin, staining the floor that had given him so much pride to have. "You have 3 days," said the leader, cleaning his knuckles on his pants. "Either you pay 100,000 pesos or your family suffers the consequences. And believe me, I'll start with the most valuable thing you have." They left as they had come, leaving behind a heavy, dense, almost tangible silence. Daniel was crying in his mother's arms. Laura remained motionless on the sofa with a lost gaze. And Martin, on the floor, tried to process what had just happened. 3 days, 100,000 pesos, a threat he couldn't ignore. "Why did you never tell me?" he asked Carmela when he could speak, while she tried to clean his wounds with a damp cloth. "Why didn't you tell me you were paying a fee? What did you want me to do?" she replied, and in her voice there was a hardness that Martine had never heard before. "Worry you from so far away? What would you have done from there? It started about 5 years ago. First it was small amounts, but they kept going up. I gave them what I could. I never thought they would charge you for everything all at once when you came back." The night was long and painful, not just from the physical blows. Martine couldn't stop thinking, searching for solutions where there seemed to be none. He couldn't go to the police. In Santa Maria, everyone knew the police worked for them. He couldn't borrow. Nobody had that kind of money, and less to give it to someone who had just arrived and had no way to pay it back. He couldn't run. His family was here, his house, everything he had built with years of work. At dawn, when the first rays of sun came through the window, Martine had made a decision. There was only one way out. There was only one place where he could get that money quickly. "I'm going back," he told Carmela as she prepared breakfast with mechanical movements, as if she were on autopilot. "Going back? Where?" she asked, although by her expression she already knew the answer. "To the United States. I'm going to cross again." Carmela's eyes filled with tears. "But you can't. They deported you. If they catch you trying to cross, they could put you in jail this time." "I have no choice," he replied, surprised by the calmness in his own voice. "We need that money in 3 days, and there's only one place where I can get it." He didn't tell her the whole plan. He didn't tell her that he had decided to contact his former boss, a builder in San Diego, who had always valued his work. He didn't tell her that he planned to ask him for a loan, promising to work for free until he paid off the debt. He didn't tell her that he knew perfectly well that, if caught, he would face a sentence of several years. Some things were better not said out loud. "How will you cross?" Carmela finally asked after a long silence. "The border is more heavily guarded than ever, and you don't have money for a smuggler." "I know someone," Martine replied. A former co-worker, Miguel, who'd been deported a year before him and who now worked taking people across. He owed him some favors. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could help him cross without charging him in advance. The next few hours were a whirlwind of hasty preparations. Martine called Miguel from a public phone, avoiding using his cell phone in case they were watching him. To his relief, Miguel agreed to help him, though he warned him the journey would be dangerous. The route he would use was not the usual one. They would have to cross through a more remote, more inhospitable area. "I'll see you tomorrow at the Morelia bus terminal," Miguel told him before hanging up. "Bring only the essentials. And prepare to walk a lot." That night, while packing a small backpack with the little he would take, Martine thought about everything that could go wrong. They could catch him as soon as he tried to cross the border. He could die in the desert, like so many others. He could reach the United States and not find his former boss, or the boss might refuse to help him. And meanwhile, his family would be here, alone, facing men capable of anything. But there was no alternative. There was no other way out. It was this or lose everything. "I'm coming with you," said a voice from the bedroom door. Martine turned to find Laura, his daughter, who was looking at him with a determination he had never seen in her. "It's crazy," he replied, shaking his head. "It's dangerous, illegal, and I can't expose you to that." "I'm already exposed," she replied, with a maturity that broke his heart. "Those men will come back. And you know what they'll do if they don't find the money. At least with you, I have a chance." Martine wanted to argue, wanted to protect her at all costs, keep her away from danger, but deep down, he knew she was right. If he didn't return in time, if he didn't get the money, Laura would be the first victim. And the idea of leaving her behind, vulnerable, was unbearable. "Your mother won't allow it," he finally said, though he already felt he was giving in. "Mom already knows," Laura replied. "She gave me the idea. She said it's safer if we both go, that she and Daniel can hide with my aunt in Pátzcuaro until we come back." Martine sat on the bed, overwhelmed. When had his teenage daughter become this woman capable of making such difficult decisions? When had his wife learned to be so strategic, so pragmatic in the face of danger? While he was away, building houses for others, his family had been here, facing a reality that he didn't even know. "Are you sure?" he asked, looking into her eyes. "Once we're on the road, there's no turning back." Laura nodded, and Martin saw in her a reflection of himself, of his own determination when he decided to cross the first time so many years ago. "I'm sure, Dad." At dawn, Martin and Laura said goodbye to Carmela and Daniel at the village bus stop. It was a quick goodbye, without visible tears, though they all felt them. They couldn't risk drawing attention, having someone notice they were fleeing. "Take care," Carmela told him, squeezing his hand, "and take care of our daughter." "I will," promised Martin. "In 2 weeks we'll be back, with the money." The trip to Morelia was tense and silent. Laura looked out the window, watching how the landscape changed, the green mountains giving way to cultivated fields and then to the first signs of the city. Martin couldn't stop thinking about everything that could go wrong, about all the dangers that awaited them. Miguel was waiting for them as promised, in a cafe near the terminal. He was a thin man, with a face weathered by the sun and eyes always alert. Martin had met him years ago when they both carried blocks at a construction site in Los Angeles. They weren't close friends, but they shared that silent brotherhood of those who have lived the same struggles. "You didn't tell me you'd bring company," said Miguel, looking at Laura with concern. "She's my daughter," replied Martin simply. "We go together or we don't go." Miguel sighed, but didn't argue. He explained the plan to them quickly. They would travel to Nogales that same night, in a cargo truck transporting furniture. From there, a contact would take them to the crossing point, about 20 kilometers from the city. They would cross at night, walking for hours through the desert, until they reached a point where another contact would pick them up in a van and take them to Phoenix. "From there on, you're on your own," concluded Miguel. "I can only guarantee that you'll cross the border. The rest depends on you." Martin nodded. He didn't expect more. It would be miracle enough if they managed to reach Arizona without being caught. The journey to Nogales was uncomfortable and exhausting. They traveled hidden among furniture in the back of a truck that moved along secondary roads to avoid checkpoints. Laura didn't complain once, though Martin could see the fear in her eyes every time the truck stopped, every time they heard voices nearby. They arrived in Nogales late at night. The border town buzzed with activity even at those hours. Miguel's contact, a man named Chuy, picked them up in an old van and took them to a small house on the outskirts. There they would spend the night, preparing to cross the next day. "It's dangerous," Chuy warned them as they ate beans in the dilapidated kitchen. "Border Patrol is using drones. They have heat sensors. Many people are being caught." "We'll risk it," replied Martin. They had no other choice. That night, lying on a thin mattress on the floor, Martin couldn't sleep. Beside him, Laura breathed softly, apparently asleep. He couldn't stop thinking about everything they had left behind, about Carmela and Daniel hiding with his sister-in-law, about the men who would surely be looking for them around the village by now. Had they discovered his plan? Would they be waiting for him to return with the money, or would they go after his family first? "Dad?" Laura's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Are you awake?" "Yes, sweetie." "What's wrong?" "I'm scared." Martin extended his arm, drawing her to him in a protective embrace, as when she was little and had nightmares. "So am I," he admitted. "But we're going to make it. I promise you." "Oh, why did you come to the United States the first time?" she asked after a moment of silence. "Was it for money?" Martin thought about the question, about all the layers it had. "Partly yes," he answered honestly. "We had nothing. Your grandmother was sick, we needed expensive medicines, but it was also for dreams, for the idea of building something better than what we had. I never thought I would stay so long." "Do you regret it?" The question floated in the darkness like a dense cloud. Martin thought about the 15 years away from his family, about everything he had missed. Laura's first steps, Daniel's first words, birthdays, Christmases. He thought about the hard jobs, the constant fear of being discovered, the loneliness of apartments shared with other men in his same situation. "No," he finally said. "I did what I had to do, just like now." At dawn, Chui took them to the crossing point. It was a desolate place, where the metal fence that divided the two countries seemed endless. In the distance, the surveillance towers could be seen, the border patrol vehicles moving like predators, searching for prey. "There's a weak point about 3 kilometers away," explained Chui, pointing east. "The fence is damaged there. You can pass underneath. Afterward, always walk north, following those mountains. In about 6 hours, you'll reach an abandoned ranch. My friend will be waiting for you there." He gave them a bag with water bottles, some energy bars, a compass, and an old cell phone with just one number saved. "In case you get lost," he said. "But don't use it unless it's life or death. The signals can be traced." Martin paid with the few dollars he had managed to save over the years, hidden in the lining of his suitcase. It was money for emergencies, and this certainly qualified as one. The sun was just starting to warm up when they began to walk, sticking close to the fence, trying to stay hidden among the sparse vegetation. Laura went in front, moving with the agility of her youth. Martin followed her, constantly watching around them, looking for signs of danger. They found the point Chui had mentioned after almost an hour of cautious walking. Indeed, the fence was damaged there, with enough space for them to slide underneath. Martin checked in all directions, making sure there was no one nearby. "You first," he told Laura. "Quick, don't stop." She nodded, lay down on the ground, and began to slide under the fence. For a moment, Martin held his breath, fearing she would get stuck, that somehow she would be trapped in that physical and symbolic border. But Laura managed to get to the other side without problems, immediately standing up and dusting herself off. Now it was his turn. He lay down on the dry earth, feeling the stones dig into his back, and began to crawl. The space was narrower than it seemed, his shoulders rubbed against the metal on both sides. For a terrible instant, he thought he wouldn't make it, that he would get stuck there in no man's land at the mercy of whoever found him. But then he felt Laura's hands gripping his arms, pulling him with all her strength. "Come on, Dad," she whispered urgently. "Almost. A little more." And suddenly he was on the other side, in US territory, illegal again, but with his daughter safe. They stood up and began walking north without looking back, following the mountains as Chui had instructed them. The Arizona desert was relentless. The sun rose in the sky, turning each step into a challenge. They drank water in moderation, knowing they had to make it last. They spoke little, focused on moving, on staying alert. As the day progressed, Martin noticed that Laura was walking more slowly, that her steps were becoming heavier. "Are you okay?" he asked, concerned. "I'm just tired," she replied, though her face reddened by the sun and her dry lips told another story. "Let's rest for a while," suggested Martin, seeking shade under some large rocks. It wasn't much, but at least it protected them from the direct sun. They sat in silence, sharing water and an energy bar. Martin calculated they had traveled almost half the way, but the hardest hours were yet to come. The sun would reach its highest point soon, and the heat would be unbearable. "What will we do when we get to San Diego?" Laura suddenly asked. Martin explained his plan: contact his former boss, ask for help, work until he got the money, and then return to Mexico, this time by legal means, paying the fee they owed and perhaps negotiating an arrangement for the future. "And if it doesn't work," she insisted, "if we don't find him or he doesn't want to help us, then we'll look for another solution," replied Martin with more confidence than he felt. "There's always a way out." They resumed their march when the sun began to descend, offering a respite from the scorching heat. Martin noticed they were moving slower than expected. Laura was making a visible effort to keep up, but her strength was waning. He himself felt the fatigue in every muscle, but forced himself to keep going. They had been walking for about 4 hours when Martin heard a sound that froze his blood, the unmistakable buzz of a drone. He stopped in his tracks, desperately looking for a place to hide, but they were in the open field with no trees or large rocks nearby. "Get down," he indicated to Laura, throwing himself on the ground and pulling her with him. "Don't move." They remained completely still, breathing as silently as possible. The buzzing became closer, more intense. Martin knew that modern drones had thermal sensors that could detect the heat of human bodies even under a thin layer of earth. The drone passed over them, so low that Martin could see it clearly. A small, black device with a camera that slowly rotated, scanning the terrain. It stayed in the area for a few minutes that seemed eternal, then moved away to the west. "Is it gone?" whispered Laura, her voice barely audible. "I think so," replied Martin, though he wasn't sure. "But let's stay here a while longer in case it comes back." When they finally dared to continue, the sun was already setting. The mountains that served as their guide began to blur in the distance, and Martin knew it would be dangerous to walk in total darkness. If they deviated, if they lost their way, they could wander through the desert for days until the water ran out. "We need to hurry," he said, though he wasn't sure how to demand more from his daughter, who could barely put one foot in front of the other, "before it gets completely dark." It was then that they heard the engines, not one, but several, approaching rapidly. The lights suddenly appeared, like yellow eyes in the twilight, truck headlights moving in their direction from different points. "Border Patrol," muttered Martin, feeling panic invade him. "They saw us." Laura looked at him with huge eyes, full of fear. "What do we do?" There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. They were trapped. If they captured both, they would deport them immediately. And then everything would have been in vain. Their family in Mexico would be in danger, with no one who could help them. "Laura," said Martin, taking her by the shoulders and looking directly into her eyes, "listen carefully to what I'm going to tell you. I'm going to run that way, toward those lights. I'm going to make them chase me. You keep going straight to the north. Don't stop for anything." "No," she protested, shaking her head violently. "I won't leave you. We came together." "It's the only way," he insisted, and in his voice there was an authority that admitted no reply. "One of us has to reach San Diego. One of us has to get that money." He handed her the backpack with the remaining water bottles, the compass, the cell phone. He also gave her the name and address of his former boss. "He will help you. Tell him who you are. Tell him you're my daughter. Explain what's happening." "Dad!" Laura was crying now, clinging to his arm. "I can't do it alone." "Yes, you can," replied Martin, hugging her one last time. "You're stronger than you think. Stronger than I was at your age. You'll make it." He didn't wait for an answer. He turned around and began running in the opposite direction, raising his arms, shouting, doing everything possible to draw attention. The truck lights turned toward him almost immediately, like predators that have found their prey. Martin ran until his lungs burned, until his legs failed him. When they finally caught up with him, he dropped to his knees, panting. The agents surrounded him, pointing at him with flashlights and weapons. "Where are the others?" one asked in Spanish. "We know you're not alone." "I got lost," replied Martin between broken breaths. "I was coming with a group, but we got separated. I don't know where they are now." The agents didn't believe him, of course. They handcuffed him and began combing the area, looking for his supposed companions. But by then, Martin knew Laura would already be far away. His daughter was fast. She was smart. If she kept the course, if she didn't panic, she had a good chance of reaching the meeting point before dawn. They put him in one of the trucks, and as they drove away, Martin looked out the back window into the darkness of the desert where his daughter continued her way alone. For the first time since it all began, he prayed. Not for himself, but for her. For the desert to be merciful, for her to find the way, for her to arrive safely. Because now, All his family's hope rested on Laura, on a 16-year-old girl who had never been to the United States, who barely spoke English, who had to find a man she had never seen and convince him to lend them 100,000 pesos to save her family. As the truck moved toward the detention center, Martin closed his eyes, exhausted. He had done what he had to do. Now all that remained was to wait and trust that his daughter was as strong as he believed she was. The days in the detention center passed with tortuous slowness. Martin shared a cold, overcrowded cell with other men in his same situation, undocumented immigrants caught trying to cross, waiting to be deported. Some had been there for weeks, others just a few days. The stories repeated themselves. They were fleeing from violence, from poverty, looking for a better life, or, as in his case, trying to save what little they had. He couldn't stop thinking about Laura. Had she reached the meeting point? Had she managed to get to San Diego? Was she safe? The questions tormented him day and night, preventing him from sleeping, eating, thinking about anything else. He had no way of knowing. He had no right to a call, no one to contact. On the 4th day of detention, they called him for the interview with the immigration officer. It was a standard procedure before deportation. Verify his identity, confirm that he had no right to asylum, process the paperwork to send him back to Mexico. Martin Suarez Mendoza, the officer read from a file in front of him. Previously deported in April, tried to cross illegally again, correct? Martin nodded in silence. There was no point in denying the obvious. Do you understand that this is considered a federal offense? Continued the officer. You could face charges, a fine, even prison time. I understand, replied Martin. Why did you try again? Asked the officer, and for the first time he looked directly into his eyes. He didn't seem hostile, just genuinely curious. What was worth the risk? Martin hesitated. What could he say? That criminals were threatening his family, that he needed money to pay a debt imposed by force. The officer probably wouldn't believe him, or worse, could use that information to further complicate his situation. My family, he finally said, they needed help. The officer looked at him for a few seconds more, as if evaluating him, before returning to his papers. You'll be deported on the next flight to Mexico City tomorrow morning. Until then, return to your cell. That night, Martin couldn't sleep at all. The deadline the men in Mexico had given him would expire the next day. 3 days, they had said, and he would be returning empty-handed, without money, without solutions. The image of his family in danger tormented him every time he closed his eyes. At dawn, they put him on a bus along with other deportees. The journey to the airport was silent, each man immersed in his own thoughts, in his own fears about what they would find upon returning. Martin looked out the window, watching the streets of a city he didn't know pass by, wondering if Laura had managed to reach San Diego, if she had found Mr. Gonzalez, his former boss. The plane took off shortly after noon. Sitting by the window, Martin saw how the United States became smaller and smaller beneath him, until it disappeared among the clouds. He thought about the irony of it all. He had spent 15 years dreaming of returning to Mexico, of reuniting with his family, of living in the house he had built for them. And now, just a few weeks after that long-awaited return, he would give anything to be back in Los Angeles, working in construction, sending money home as before. They landed in Mexico City in the middle of the afternoon. The reception process was quick and mechanical. They returned his few belongings, gave him a document certifying his deportation, and left him free at the bus terminal. From there, he would have to find his own way back to Michoacan. He used what little money he had left to buy a ticket on the first bus to Morelia. From there, he would have to find a way to get to Santa Maria del Oro. But first, he needed to make a call. The public phone at the terminal kept being busy every time he tried. Finally, after several attempts, He managed to communicate with his sister-in-law's house in Pátzcuaro, where Carmela and Daniel were supposed to be hiding. "Hello?" His sister's voice sounded tense, cautious. "It's me, Martin," he replied, feeling a lump in his throat. "Is everyone okay? Are Carmela and Daniel with you?" There was a silence on the other end of the line that seemed eternal to him. "They took them, Martin," his sister finally said, and he could hear the contained crying in her voice. "They came here 2 days ago. We weren't here, but the neighbors saw everything. They took Carmela and Daniel in a black van. We don't know where they are." Martin felt the world stop. The air became dense, impossible to breathe. He leaned against the wall to avoid falling, while his sister's words kept coming, distant as through a tunnel. "They've been asking about you, about Laura. The whole village knows you left. They say if you don't come back with the money by tomorrow, we'll never see Carmela or Daniel again." "I'm coming," Martin managed to say, though he didn't know how he could fix anything, how he could save his family when everything seemed lost. "I'll arrive tomorrow morning." The journey to Morelia was a blur of fear and desperation. Martin couldn't think clearly, couldn't plan his next move. All he knew was that his wife and son were in mortal danger and that he was returning empty-handed, without money, without help, without hope. He arrived in Morelia at dawn. From there, he paid for a final bus to Pátzcuaro. His sister was waiting for him at the terminal, with eyes swollen from crying so much. "I'm sorry," was the first thing she said as she hugged him. "I'm so sorry. We couldn't protect them." "It's not your fault," replied Martin, though the words sounded empty even to himself. "Have you heard anything else? Any message? Any call?" His sister shook her head. "Nothing. It's as if the earth had swallowed them up. Nobody knows where they're keeping them, or no one wants to say. The police don't help. We already tried. They say there's no evidence of kidnapping, that maybe they left on their own." At that moment, his sister's cell phone rang. She looked at the screen with confusion. "Unknown number," she murmured, before answering cautiously. Martin saw how her expression changed, from confusion to surprise to something that seemed like hope. She handed him the phone with trembling hands. "They want to talk to you," she said quietly. Martin took the cell phone warily. "Hello? Dad?" The voice on the other end of the line made him hold his breath. "It's me, Laura." "Laura!" he exclaimed, feeling tears blur his vision. "Where are you? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," she replied, and her voice sounded strong, determined. "I'm in San Diego. I found Mr. Gonzalez. He helped me, Dad. I have the money, all the money." Martin couldn't believe it. It was impossible. "How?" "There's no time to explain," Laura interrupted him. "I already know about Mom and Daniel. Mr. Gonzalez has contacts in Santa Maria. They're helping us locate them. I'm coming back today." "No." Martin stopped her, terrified at the idea of his daughter putting herself in danger again. "It's too risky. Stay there. I'll take care of everything." "I'm already on my way," replied Laura, and in her voice there was a determination that Martin recognized as his own. "I'll arrive in Tijuana in a few hours. From there, I'll take a flight to Morelia. We'll see each other tomorrow afternoon." Before Martin could protest more, the communication was cut off. He stood staring at the phone, stunned by the mixture of emotions. Relief at knowing Laura was safe, fear for what might happen to her on the journey back, hope at the possibility of rescuing Carmela and Daniel, anguish at not knowing where they were or in what conditions. "Is she okay?" asked his sister, taking the cell phone from his trembling hands. "Yes," replied Martin. "She says she got the money, that she's coming back." His sister looked at him in disbelief. "How is that possible? Where did she get so much money in so little time?" Martin shook his head. He didn't know, and at that moment it didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was that there was a possibility, however small, of saving his family. The next 24 hours were the longest of his life. Martin barely ate, barely slept. Every sound startled him. Every knock at the door quickened his heart. He was waiting for news, waiting for a sign, waiting for his daughter. Laura arrived in Morelia as promised, the next day in the afternoon. When Martin saw her get out of the taxi in front of his sister's house, he could hardly believe it was her. Something had changed in his daughter. It wasn't just the visible fatigue on her face, the deep circles under her eyes. It was something else, something in her gaze, in the way she stood tall despite the exhaustion, as if she had aged years in just a few days. They hugged in silence, a long and tight embrace that said everything that words couldn't express. "I did it, Dad," Laura finally said, showing him a backpack she was carrying carefully. "It's all here." Martin looked at her, full of questions he didn't dare to ask. How had she gotten so much money in so little time? What had she had to do? What had she had to give up? "Mr. Gonzalez helped me," she explained, as if reading his thoughts. "He lent me part of the money when I explained what was happening, and he got your former co-workers to donate the rest. Everyone remembered you, Dad. Everyone wanted to help." Martin felt a wave of gratitude so intense, it almost brought him to his knees. After so many years working in silence, keeping his head down, it turned out he had left a deeper mark than he ever imagined. "And there's more," continued Laura, lowering her voice. "Mr. Gonzalez has a friend who's a journalist. He's investigating these people, the ones who took Mom and Daniel. They're not just local criminals. They're part of something bigger, and there are people who want to stop them." Before Martin could process all this information, Laura's cell phone rang. She answered immediately, listened in silence, and then looked at her father with an expression that mixed fear and determination. "They found them," she said, covering the phone's microphone. "They're in a house on the outskirts of the village. An abandoned ranch. They're alive." Martin felt his heart skip a beat. "How do they know? Who has seen them?" "Mr. Gonzalez's contacts," replied Laura. "They've been watching, asking around. They have more people held there, not just Mom and Daniel. They're asking for ransom from several families." The plan formed quickly. They would go to Santa Maria that very night. They would contact the men, tell them they had the money, that they were willing to pay the full fee. They would ask to see Carmela and Daniel before handing over the money. Once they were all together, they would leave immediately. They would abandon the village, the house, everything. They would start over somewhere else. It was a simple plan, full of holes and possibilities for something to go wrong, but it was all they had. The journey to Santa Maria was tense, each kilometer bringing them closer to danger, to confrontation, to the moment of truth. Laura sat next to Martin on the bus, with the backpack firmly secured on her lap. They didn't talk much, each immersed in their own thoughts, in their own fears. They arrived at the village late at night. The streets were almost empty, the lights in the houses turning off one by one as their inhabitants prepared to sleep. Martin and Laura walked in silence to their house, following the shadows, avoiding being seen. The house was as they had left it, but it felt different. Empty, cold, as if it no longer belonged to them. Martin turned on a small lamp in the living room, just enough to illuminate without drawing too much attention. "Now what?" asked Laura, sitting on the sofa without letting go of the backpack. "Now we wait," replied Martin. "They'll know we've returned. They'll come on their own." They didn't have to wait long. Barely an hour after their arrival, they heard the noise of vehicles stopping in front of the house. Headlights briefly illuminated the windows before turning off. Footsteps on the entrance path, low voices. "Stay behind me," Martin indicated to Laura as he went to open the door. There were 4 men this time, not 7 like before. The leader, whom Martin immediately recognized, smiled smugly. "Well, well," he said, entering the house without waiting for an invitation. "Look who's back. Did you have a good trip to the United States, Martin, or should I call you Wetback?" Martin didn't respond to the provocation. "Where are my wife and son?" he asked, straight to the point. "They're comfortable, don't worry," replied the man, walking around the living room as if he owned it. His eyes settled on Laura, who remained in a corner, clutching the backpack. "Ah, And the princess came back too. How touching, the family reunited again. "We have your money," said Martin, taking a step to stand between the man and his daughter. "The 100,000 pesos. We want to see them before paying." The leader looked at him with amusement. "You think you're in a position to negotiate? We make the rules here, jackass. Without my wife and son, there's no money," insisted Martin, keeping his voice firm despite the fear. "And if something happens to us, there are people who know what you're doing, people with influence, people who can do you a lot of harm." For the first time, he saw a flash of doubt in the man's eyes. "What the hell are you talking about?" Martin didn't respond directly. "Bring them. Bring my family. Give us 5 minutes to make sure they're okay. And then we'll give you the money. All of it. No problems." The leader evaluated him with his gaze for a few seconds that seemed eternal. Finally, he made a gesture to one of his men, who left immediately. 5 minutes, he conceded. Not a second more. The next 20 minutes were a hell of waiting. No one spoke. The men watched every movement of Martin and Laura while they remained seated on the sofa in a tense silence that seemed about to break at any moment. Finally, they heard the vehicle returning. Footsteps at the entrance. The door opened. Carmela entered first, with Daniel sticking close to her. Both looked pale, frightened, but unharmed. When they saw Martin and Laura, their faces lit up with a mixture of relief and fear. "Dad, Laura!" exclaimed Daniel, trying to run toward them. The man who had brought them stopped him, holding him by the arm. "The money first," ordered the leader. Laura handed the backpack to her father. Martin opened it, showing the bundles of bills carefully arranged inside. 100,000 pesos, he said, extending the backpack toward the leader. "Count them if you want." The man took the backpack, opened it, and checked its contents superficially. He seemed satisfied. "Release them," he ordered his companion, who freed Carmela and Daniel. The family merged in a tight, desperate embrace. Martin felt Carmela's sobs against his chest, Daniel's small hands clinging to his waist. Laura hugged them all, forming a protective circle. "They've paid," said the leader, heading for the door. "But this doesn't end here. The fee continues, every month. And now that we know you can get money quickly, maybe we'll raise the price." Martin looked at him over his wife's shoulder. "We're leaving," he said with a calmness he didn't feel. "We're leaving here. Today. The house is yours. Everything in it. But we're leaving, and we won't come back." The leader let out a laugh. "And you think that changes anything? We'll find you wherever you go. A village, a city, another state. It doesn't matter. We'll always find you." "No," replied Martin. "You won't." And then, as if it were a signal, sirens were heard in the distance, many sirens, approaching rapidly. The leader's face changed from arrogance to confusion to alarm. "What did you do?" he asked, pulling a gun from his belt. "Nothing," replied Martin. "But my daughter did more than you can imagine." The blue and red lights began to be seen through the windows, illuminating the living room in intermittent flashes. Voices, amplified by megaphones, ordered everyone to come out with their hands up. "Federal police," explained Laura, looking directly at the leader, "with arrest warrants for kidnapping, extortion, and human trafficking. Mr. Gonzalez didn't just get the money for us. He also got evidence against you, testimonies, photographs, names, places, everything." The leader pointed his gun at her, his face distorted by rage. Martin moved instinctively to protect her, but it wasn't necessary. Before he could shoot, the door flung open and a group of armed officers entered, throwing them all to the floor and handcuffing the criminals in a matter of seconds. What followed was a whirlwind of activity, statements, identifications, more police coming in and out of the house, photographs, questions. Martin, Carmela, Laura, and Daniel remained together, embraced, unable to let go, as if fearing that by doing so the other might disappear again. A high-ranking officer finally approached them. "You're safe now," he assured them. "These men are part of a network we've been investigating for months. Thanks to the information we received yesterday, we were finally able to act. You've helped save many families, not just your own." Martin looked at Laura with amazement and pride. His daughter, his little girl, had achieved what he couldn't, find not only the money for the ransom, but also the way to end the threat forever. That night, while the police continued working, the Suarez family stayed in a hotel in the village, guarded by officers. No one slept much. There was too much to process, too much to tell, too many emotions. "What will we do now?" asked Daniel, nestled between his parents on one of the beds. "Where will we go?" Martin looked at Carmela, then at Laura, seeking answers. It was his daughter who spoke first. "Mr. Gonzalez offered me something more than money," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "He offered to help us all get visas. He has contacts, knows lawyers. He says Dad has a strong case now, with everything that happened. We could try. We could all go, legally this time." Martin felt his heart skip a beat. Was it possible? After everything they had been through, could there be a chance to return, but this time all together, without fear, without lies? "Do you want that?" he asked Carmela, who looked at him with a mixture of hope and doubt. "Do you want to leave everything and go?" She looked around at the hotel room that now contained everything they had left. A united family, but without a home, without belongings, without anything but each other. "I want us to be together," she finally replied. "Wherever, however. I don't want any more goodbyes." Martin nodded, understanding. For 15 years, he had sent money to Mexico, dreaming of the day he could return and be with his family. He had built a house he never really lived in, had planned a life he never had a chance to live. And now that they were finally together, the irony was that perhaps they would all have to leave, start over somewhere else. "Then we'll try," he decided, embracing his family. Together this time. Never separating again. Dawn found them like this, the four cuddled on the same bed, exhausted but together. Outside, in the streets of Santa Maria del Oro, people were beginning to wake up, to learn about what had happened during the night, to tell stories about the family that confronted the criminals who had tormented the village for years. Martin knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. The visas, the paperwork, starting over again in a new place. But as he looked at his sleeping wife beside him, at his children finally safe, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Peace. The certainty that whatever happened, they would face it together, as a family, as it always should have been. "What time is it?" murmured Laura, slowly waking up. "Time to start over," replied Martin, smiling for the first time in weeks. But this time, all together. And as the sun continued to rise on the horizon, illuminating a new day, Martin knew that this was the true wealth he had worked for all those years. Not the house, not the money, but this. The love that had kept them together despite the distance, despite the time, despite everything. A love that no border, no deportation, no threat could ever destroy. Have you ever wondered what you would do if you found yourself in a similar situation? How far would you go to protect your family?